We welcome everyone this morning, the audience, the viewers, and especially the two candidates for the Cape and Islands State Senate District. I would remind everyone to either turn off or silence anything that might make noise, any phones or pagers. Our two candidates are Julian Cyr is the Democrat candidate, and Anthony Schiava is the Republican candidate. The candidates have agreed to the following procedures and ground rules for today's forum. There will be 4 segments. In the first segment, each candidate will have up to 2 minutes for their opening statement. The order of these candidate statements has been determined by a random drawing. And throughout the forum, I will attempt to continuously rotate the order of the candidates' responses so that no one is always first or always last. The second and third segments are questions and answers. First, from Jeff Spillane from the Cape Cod Times, and then written questions from the audience. Each candidate will have up to 1.5 minutes to respond. And as I mentioned, we'll continuously rotate the order of responders. The last segment, the candidates will have up to 2 minutes for a closing statement. And again, this has been selected by a random drawing. Our timers are right here in the very front row for our candidates and myself, Nancy Erskine and Betsy Bray. And I would ask any audience members to please submit your written questions. If you just hold them up, there are lead members walking around the auditorium, and they will collect the questions. We will begin with an opening statement from Julian Cyr.
Good morning. Thank you to the League, the Cape Cod Times, the Cape Cod Community College for hosting us here today, and for all of you for joining us on an early Saturday morning. We both really appreciate actually some flexibility with timing. Tony and I actually get on Nantucket later this afternoon. So I'm Julian Cyr. I'm running for state senate. I was born and raised here on Cape Cod, and I'm someone who is grounded in our community with the relevant experience to tackle the problems we face. If I'm elected as your next state senator, I will make sure that the issues that we care about here on Cape Cod, on Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard don't get lost in Beacon Hill. My background has prepared me to succeed as state senator, and I know that I can deliver results for the Cape and Islands. I grew up in Truro, working in my family's restaurant. As a local, I really know how our seasonal economy works. I know the joys and the challenges of making a living in a small business, like so many of us here do. That's really part of my DNA. For the last 6 years, I worked in state government, first in the Patrick and then in the Baker administrations, working in a bipartisan fashion to ensure health and safety here in the Commonwealth. At the Mass Department of Public Health, I spent extensive time working with the legislature, working alongside state senators, representatives, and their staff, both Democrats and Republicans, to keep tabs on over 1,300 bills with relevance to the agency's 10 units and 100 programs. I led budget advocacy for the agency, which is $600 million in state appropriations, which include hospital safety and emergency preparedness. Worked extensively on Pilgrim, worked with Senator Dan Wolf, Representative Sarah Peake, Senator DiMacedo, all 200 members of the legislature on public health related policy. I'm the only candidate in this race who has received the endorsement of over 20 diverse organizations, representing a whole host of folks here that care about the Cape and the islands. And these folks believe that this native son has the experience in state government to tackle our opioid epidemic, to focus on housing affordability, meet the needs of seniors, and ensure we pay attention to our environment while supporting small business. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. And an opening statement from Mr. Schiava.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Tony Schiava, and it's an honor to be here this morning with all of you. Thank you to the League, the Cape Cod Times, as well as my family members and my many supporters. There's a lot at stake at this election. We have critical issues facing the Cape and Islands today, ones that I believe require proven and effective leadership, credible, comprehensive experience, years embedded in the region dealing directly with these issues, and the ability to cross party lines in an effort to bring forth lasting solutions. I bring to this race a proven track record of working closely with individuals on all sides of the aisle to address complex problems. I'm committed to working on behalf of the interests of all of Cape Cod and the island's residents and business community. So what will Tony Schiava bring to the state senate? First, I have lived on Cape Cod for the last 25 years and where my grandchildren are being raised. I'm a former town manager and police commissioner. I'm a retired Air Force general with a distinguished 30-year career, a fighter pilot and veteran of Operation Desert Storm. I was the first executive director of Joint Base Cape Cod and operations commander when F-15s from the Cape were the first to respond to the terrorist attacks on 9/11. I serve on the Long-Term Care and Housing Commission for Veterans and the governor's appointee to the Military Asset and Security Strategy Task Force. I've also owned 2 small businesses here on Cape Cod. As Wing Commander at Joint Base Cape Cod, I helped to lead the effort to protect more than 1,000 jobs and preserve $330 million in economic benefit for our community. As a town manager, we were able, under my leadership, to achieve a AAA bond rating in less than 2 years and secure millions of dollars for housing and economic development. As a police commissioner, I led the reorganization of a department in need of change and reform. My top priorities include fighting the opiate epidemic and crime in the region, promoting affordable housing and addressing homelessness, setting the right conditions for economic development and growth, protecting the environment, quality education, and ensuring better care for students, seniors, and veterans, and bringing fiscal responsibility to Beacon Hill. To achieve these goals and others, partisan politics just won't cut it. I will do this by bringing with me a portfolio of proven successful accomplishments spanning 3 decades with many established relationships, the ability to cross party lines in ways beyond others, and with my dedication to address the needs of all the constituents of Cape Cod and the islands. And I ask for your vote on November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you, and we will now begin with 2 questions from a reporter, Jim Spillane from the Cape Cod Times. And the first question will be, we'll go to Senator Sear first.
Wow, that
was easy. Good morning. And these, I'll ask 2 questions, and both questions we'll ask for responses from both candidates. First one, Cape Cod Healthcare recently issued a report that Cape Cod's population, to nobody's surprise, is aging faster than the rest of the state. Barnstable County is expected to lose 13% of its population by 2035. That same year, it's predicted 35% of the population here will be over the age of 65. What is your plan to balance both ends of the demographic spectrum, both attracting younger residents here while also providing services for older citizens? And please be specific with plan details.
Thank you, Jeff. As you said, these demographics are alarming. When you come out to mine in the Cape, actually, Truro, those numbers are actually a lot even higher. I think when we talk about the needs for younger folks on Cape Cod, when I say younger, I mean sort of anyone under 55, 50. We need to talk about housing and housing affordability. The current affordable housing programs just don't cut it for a lot of us. We need to work towards making sure that first-time homeowners can actually have a hope of buying here on the Cape. I'm proposing a tax-deductible savings account for first-time homeowners. This is a policy that's been implemented in Virginia and Wyoming. It's actually a Republican proposal. I think this would really be something that would help make a difference for those of us who are here. We need to promote development of affordable rental housing for folks on the older end of the spectrum. I think we need to make sure that we are helping people stay in their homes, also ensuring that we're providing services and support to caregivers. So many of the people who are here in and of our community are being supported by a spouse or a child. This is something that's really critical. I also think we need to make it more affordable for seniors to stay in their homes as well. I'm proposing continue Dan Wolf's work to promote the senior citizen circuit breaker and to work to expand those qualifications for that as well. So this is an issue, if we don't get this right here on the Cape, we've got a pretty significant, serious challenge ahead for us. I really think there's an opportunity here in our demographics to be a place where we can provide solutions and support for our older community through healthcare, through innovation. I'd like to look at how you leverage technology, the Open Cape Network, and really make sure that we're providing supports for not only not only seniors, but all the folks in the community who are in it. So I think we got to start with affordable housing, and we need to start with supports for caregivers.
Great, thank you very much. In addition to the Cape Cod Healthcare Report, there was also a recent report that was done, a presentation by a gentleman from the Cape Cod Commission, and it talked about the population shift here on Cape Cod. And when you got to the end of that presentation, one of the conclusions, the primary conclusion, really surrounded housing. And not just housing for the young, but also providing housing for the different life segments that people go through here on Cape Cod. Everything from our young adults all the way through to our seniors. And so as we look at housing and providing more of a more diverse set of housing opportunities here on Cape Cod, we need to consider it across the spectrum, not only for our young people, but also for our seniors. There's a couple of ways to do that. As a state senator, one of the things you can do is to help set the conditions that will provide opportunities for communities to establish affordable housing by changing some of the zoning requirements right now that drive a lot of density, which is where we see a lot of the pushback in our communities when folks are proposing affordable housing developments because they tend to be very large. And it doesn't necessarily fit within our construct here on Cape Cod. And I have worked on affordable housing projects as a chief executive in a community, worked with our state senator to bring resources that help us set the conditions of bringing in water and sewer, gas, fiber optics that spurned a $100 million rental complex that included affordable housing for young people and young professionals. And I look to do that here on Cape Cod and bring some of that money to the Cape. And when you look at seniors, as they get on in life, they need places that they can downsize to, which don't really exist in great quantity right now, that can free up housing stock for that next part of the generation that needs to move into those, single-family homes of maybe multiple levels. And I've worked, again, as a chief executive of a community to bring, housing to the seniors in the community that I worked in that did free up housing for the younger folks that wanted to move into our community with, children for the schools and et cetera. I also think we need to think out of the box on how we can provide some additional tax credits to our seniors. There's been some pilot programs right now that really revolve around shifting the burden on some of the larger tax exclusions that communities use to fund projects. And so that the burden isn't really placed on seniors, it's really put on some of those in the middle that could perhaps afford to pay a little bit more. So we need to look across the spectrum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Now we're on to our second question. One that's very familiar, I'm sure, to both of you. Wastewater treatment solutions, particularly sewering, potentially represent a huge financial burden that could significantly impact Cape Cod towns and taxpayers in the years ahead. As a state senator, what would be your role and/or strategy to secure resources to help offset these costs to preserve our natural resources here on the Cape?
Okay, thank you. I want to make sure before I started speaking. We know that wastewater and water quality is a major issue on Cape Cod. If you look at conventional wastewater, and I've run a wastewater treatment plant, and I've been part of the MWRA as an executive. If we look at wastewater in the entire Cape, we all know it's a multi-billion-dollar problem. When I look at it, I think we need to look at it in segments and look at a variety of options to address wastewater, which will improve our water quality in the Cape. Some areas may require conventional wastewater treatment, perhaps in some of those most impacted areas on the Cape. But I also think we need to look at new technologies. There's a company here in the Cape that's looking at treating wastewater using algae, and part of that, it creates a byproduct of energy. And so we need to look at new technologies as well. In the town of Harwich, they're looking at the Bank Street bogs and Muddy Creek as places that may have potential for natural filtering of nutrients to take nitrogen out and other things like phosphorus that don't really cost a lot of money and can perhaps save hundreds of millions of dollars in sewering a large number of homes in those areas. And so as we look at wastewater solutions, we need to look broadly at that. As a state senator, one of the things that I would make sure that happens is that we keep our state revolving fund that provides low interest or no interest loans to communities to help keep the cost of borrowing down as they address their wastewater projects in their community, as well as looking at the MassWorks program. There's $330 million in the MassWorks program. I used that successfully as a town manager to bring in $6 million that put in the wastewater infrastructure and the water infrastructure that spurred that development that I talked to. And I would work hard to make sure the communities that want to have access to the MassWorks program, that I be their advocate on Beacon Hill to make sure that some of that funding doesn't just go to the gateway cities and other communities outside of Boston, that some of that funding comes directly here to Cape Cod. And so I think we need to look at a number of different ways to address wastewater, not just focus solely on a conventional wastewater treatment system for the entire Cape. Regionalization may be an option in some communities, and I think that needs to be looked at as well. I'm a proponent of that as well, where it makes sense and where communities can get together and work together to save money but still do the right thing as it relates to keeping our water quality high. Thank you.
So our next state senator needs to pick up the baton and work on wastewater, specifically in two areas. One in appropriations and funding, and the second in moving innovation through the regulatory process. So we need significant resources and help from the state That requires a state senator who understands how you navigate the budget process. I've done 6 budgets working for the Department of Public Health. I remember when I was starting off working with the legislature at the Department of Public Health, a mentor of mine said to me, Julian, you don't know anything until you've been through 2 budget cycles. Having been through 6, I know that's true. This is really, we all think we also need a senator who's going to be able to convey to members in caucus, to the Senate, what's going to be lost if we can't address wastewater here on the Cape. This is an economic issue for us. This is clean water is directly tied and linked to this being a favorite international destination. I think we have a little advantage here. A lot of legislators actually have second homes, come and enjoy this place. So that's kind of an argument to make. I really have had success in appropriations. $1.8 million expansion, I successfully was able to get through the budget for public health programs, 5-fold increase in anti-bullying. I really know how to navigate that budget process. It's very specific, it's very wonky. It's something that I've done. I think the second piece is around innovation. So a lot of the alternative solutions to this challenge need to go through the Mass Department of Environmental Protection. I have worked directly with Mass DEP when I was Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs in environmental health at DPH. I would have monthly meetings with all the key players at DEP, talk about a whole host of issues where environmental health and environmental protection intersected. And I think really is understanding their regulatory framework, their regulatory structure, and convincing them to expedite opportunities for us here on the Cape and Islands to address wastewater. Otherwise, these are just really good, innovative ideas that aren't going to go anywhere.
We'll now begin with the many questions that we have from the audience. And the first responder to this question will be Senator Sear. I'm sorry. How will the candidates be voting on questions 1 and 3? The first question is the slots.
I guess Senator Sear has a nice ring to it. I'm no on question. No on question 1. This is a parochial gambling issue. I am not for expanding gambling in the Commonwealth. I actually was not for the original proposal put through under the prior administration. This is something I think we'll be grappling with gambling. Increasingly, you look at the numbers of gambling and revenue. I think this is a bit of a panacea. I expect that in 10 or 20 years we'll be working to undo what's been done with gambling. If you look from a revenue perspective, if you look at the cost from a social perspective, this is really poor economic development. We should be having honest conversations about how we can bring in revenue to the Commonwealth. I'm a big supporter of the Fair Share Amendment, taxing people who make over $1 million a little bit more to ensure infrastructure and education investments. I'm definitely supportive of animal welfare and support question 3.
Same question, Mr. Sear.
Great, thank you. I'm also not in support of question 1. As a town manager, we had a prospective casino that was going to open near our community, and we were very much opposed and joined with several other communities to oppose gambling in our region. If you already look at it, I don't think you have to wait 20 years. When the first slots parlor opened, and this is what this question actually deals with, is opening the first slots parlor. There's obviously a lot of excitement initially when these places opened, a lot of activity. Within a year, they already saw a drastic decline in revenues. And to go and do it again, I just think is going to, one, saturate it if you're even into that kind of thing, which I don't necessarily think is a good thing for Massachusetts. I think it's going to start to spur other negative activity if we continue to promote gambling here in Massachusetts. So it's not the revenue generator that I think people think it's going to be, and it's going to drive some negativeness to it as well. On question 3, I grew up on a farm in Sherburne, Massachusetts, and we raised animals, dairy cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys. And I think that today the humane treatment of animals is very important. These massive farms that are out there, and let's be clear that as it relates to this particular particular question, in my understanding, there's only one farm in Massachusetts that relates to chickens, egg-laying chickens and hens. There's only one farm in Massachusetts that this would apply to. One of my concerns, though, if it does pass, is how we're going to implement it. How are we going to make sure that food coming into Massachusetts from other places comply with this law? I'm not sure if it's not going to drive, a new department in the government or have to hire more people to make sure that those imports into Massachusetts comply with this law about, restrictions on farm animals and veal and those kind of things. And so that's going to be something that if this passes, I'm going to vote no on it. I'm going to vote yes on it, but we're going to have to see what the implications of that are in the long run. Some of the concerns I have heard from people is whether it's going to drive up prices, which could very much affect the lower income families that depend on, milk and eggs and those type of, staples, and will it drive up prices and hurt some of the lower income families, and that's a concern as well. Thank you.
And now just the other two ballot questions also. There are a number of questions specifically for 2 or 4, and I will just combine them, what your positions are on questions 2 and 4, the charter schools and the marijuana. And Mr. Schiavi, you will begin, please.
Thank you. The charter schools are different. Let me start off by saying I do support charter schools and the diversity of education, especially as it relates to the Cape and Islands, where my focus is. We have charter schools, we have public schools where 98% of our students are educated. We have private schools, we have parochial schools. We have a great diversity of education. I spoke with the director of the Cape House Lighters Charter School, which is right down from our house in Harwich. A wonderful school. I think it's the oldest one on Cape Cod. And he's not necessarily in favor of expansion either, and feels we're meeting the needs. But the issue with charter schools and the way this particular ballot question is written, I think we need to start looking at the impacts that the funding aspects have on public schools. And I know there's a lot of back and forth about whether it drains education dollars or not. As a town manager, we were paying out $1 million a year in assessments for charter schools, and we're being reimbursed by the state $200,000. I have a degree in mathematics, but you don't have to have one to know that there's a deficit there of $800,000. And we have a higher degree of English language learners and special education students in our public school system. And the formula that's used to determine what those assessments are is really not fairly done. And so I'm not in favor at this point of raising the cap on charter schools. I prefer them to be directly related to districts that can see an immediate improvement. Most of those are in the urban areas. I'm also no on question 4, marijuana. We're facing the biggest, probably, public health crisis we have in a very long time. We don't need to be legalizing another intoxicant on top of that. And you only have to look at the data coming out of places like Colorado and Alaska and Washington State to know that more suspensions in schools, more overdoses of young children in hospitals. Pets are being affected by this when they eat these products. Also, the fatal accidents that have marijuana related to them have gone up significantly in these communities. This referendum, this ballot question, was written by the marijuana industry for the marijuana industry. And that's why you see things like only a 12% tax rate on this versus 37 and 44% in other states. This is bad for Massachusetts, bad for our children. We should never do anything just because of revenue. This would be bad, and I encourage everyone to vote no on question 4.
Question, Mr. Sears.
Sure. So Tony and I agree on both of these. Question 2, this is, first of all, just not germane to the education needs of the Cape and Islands. This is a distraction. I think there are a lot of things that charter schools do well. My sister graduated actually from the Cape Cod Lighthouse Charter School. I wasn't so lucky to get in, but I think there's a lot of concerns around who's getting into charter schools and who isn't, right? Who are these public schools serving? I think broadly, I'm really interested in how do we move from an opt-in structure where basically your parents have to kind of make sure you get in the lottery to an opt-out, right? Everyone gets a chance. It's not dependent on whether or not your parents have time, the resources, the education to get you in. I think the Senate actually did a good job in having a bill that both addressed district needs, funding, reforms for districts, and charters in the last session. Couldn't get that through the House, and this is taking on one piece of our education needs. Again, a very small percentage of our students go to charter schools and does nothing for the rest of our schools. On question 4, look, this is bad public policy. I worked at the Department of Public Health, worked on the medical marijuana regulations for a time, actually working on issues of edibles and so forth. I know what it's like to work in a state agency that is tasked with implementing a very poorly written ballot initiative. I think broadly, when you talk about marijuana, recreational use, and legalization, I think we're going there ultimately. I think the train has left the station on that one. You know, there is, I didn't hear, I don't know the statistics about pets in Colorado, but you know, specifically, this is bad public policy, and I think if marijuana recreational marijuana is legalized in the Commonwealth, it needs to be done in a much more responsible way, in a way that is not through this ballot initiative.
Okay, the next question will begin with Mr. Sear. The governor announced this week that there's going to be a shortfall of $274 million, indicating cuts coming in services this week. And economists are recommending that we need an increase to receive support for education and infrastructure. Is it time to consider additional sources of revenue?
Absolutely. So I've actually been through these processes. Last time this year was working on putting together a suite of proposed cuts at the Department of Public Health that would then go to the Secretary's office and then to the Governor's office. We have a self-induced revenue problem in the Commonwealth. So if you look at our economy, we're doing quite well. Not everyone is doing quite well, but when you look at, you know, overall as a state, there's a lot of advantages that we have, and that's not being reflected in our revenue. We have largely the budget crunch here in the Commonwealth is being driven by increasing healthcare costs. They're eating a bigger and bigger and bigger portion of the state's budget. Most other state agency funding has remained flat or actually has decreased. I've seen this at the Department of Public Health, where funding for food safety, radiation control, childhood lead poisoning protection has been flat or decreasing. I've been in the room when making decisions about, all right, what do we do? We need 20 food inspectors to meet FDA standards. We've got 10. What do we do? And that has consequences for us here right at home, right? With for instance, the norovirus issue that's happening in Wellfleet that's closing off Oyster Fest. You know, and so I think we really need to be talking about looking at targeted revenue for education, for infrastructure. I'm a big proponent of the Fair Share Amendment. This is to tax income and anything that's made over $1 million here in the Commonwealth at a slightly higher rate. This is something that makes good sense. Other states have done this. Minnesota, so folks, you know, you'll hear them like, oh, we can't do this, the sky's going to fall, it's going to hurt small business. From a small business perspective, and I grew up in a small business, I don't know many or any small business owners on Cape Cod who are grossing over $1 million a year in income. And second, Minnesota actually did this policy in a more expanded way. It's actually, they have gone from having a deficit to a surplus, their unemployment has decreased, and they're one of the most competitive states in the nation. So I think this is something that makes really good sense. Not increasing revenues at the state level means that here, if we want to do anything in our communities, we have to rely on property taxes. Property taxes are regressive, they impact seniors, they impact families. I'd rather ask the rich to pay their fair share.
Mr. Sciarra, the same question.
Thank you very much. Obviously, the governor's 9C cuts, and every governor faces this in the fall when they look at revenue estimates. Now, I haven't just worked on budgets. I've been responsible and accountable for creating budgets. And I think we all need to realize the way state budgets are generated is a lot of it's based on estimates. You know, during Governor Patrick's administration, you know, they were way overestimating revenue, especially in the area of capital gains. When Governor Baker came in, he had a $1.9 billion deficit left over from the Patrick administration that he needed to deal with. Government needs to be responsible to its citizens that pay taxes. And I am a reform before taxes type of person. Now, $274 million, nobody wants to see cuts in services. But when you have a $40 billion budget and you're short by $274 million, you know, that's getting pretty close to target. I know the governor's committed to making sure that we live within our means. And so we need to find efficiencies in government that can free up resources to go to places in the government that need it in providing services to our communities and that are provided by the state. I have done that work myself in a community that was spending millions, or taking millions out of their savings fund in order to balance the budget. And I balanced that budget within 1 year. We stopped taking money out of reserves. We doubled the size of the reserve account. And we also expanded services at the same time. Don't be mistaken. You don't have to have a math degree. This is fair share is not fair. Now, Julian just said it was a slight increase. It's a 4% increase on top of a 5.1% income tax, right? That is an 80% increase on those making over $1 million a year. 80%. But I don't care what viewpoint you have on that. 80% tax increase on anyone is too much. Secondly, there's constitutional barriers to even passing this legislation. You can't dedicate revenues to any particular thing. Only the legislature can do that. 80% of our small businesses pay at the personal income tax level. Julian's experience in economics mostly has to do with the Outer Cape. There is a thriving year-round economy and small business economy on this island, on Cape Cod and the islands, where people are, they're earning that type of money. And this could drive up jobs. They will start cutting benefits for employees, lowering pay, because they're not just going to pay an 80% tax increase and just accept it. It's going to have a trickle-down effect on everyone, whether it's in consumer prices or in pay and benefits to our employees, and will hurt the Commonwealth, and I am against the fair share. It is not fair.
The next question is to ask each of the candidates what you would do to work to combat climate change on Cape Cod. Mr. Stiagas first.
Thank you. I think, there's a lot of different opinions about climate change and how can you affect, climate change. Everybody has a responsibility, I believe, in ensuring that we're creating a strong environment for those generations that follow us. And it covers a wide variety of areas. Certainly reducing greenhouse gas emissions is very important to that. I'm a big proponent of green energy projects, both wind when it's appropriately sited, solar, hydro, and those type of energies. And we need to, create incentives for people and companies to start to, generate more of that clean energy that can help reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We have some very, hefty targets that we're trying to meet, by 2025 and an 80% decrease by 2050 for the state. We're not really getting there right now. And it affects, our environment here on the Cape in terms of, dealing with, air quality, water quality. Those are about resource protection. And we need to change the culture in our communities about we all have that responsibility. We know that things like, burning outside and those kind of things can create, some air emission problems. And so, I think that we all need to have and take a responsibility in that and do what we can both on a governmental level, but also on a personal level in our personal lives and our homes to make sure that we're always thinking about, the environment. And, there may be things with, tides that are, rising, the erosion that exists on Cape Cod. How can we get the resources that can help, sort of slow that down and do the best that we can in making sure that we maintain a positive environmental outlook for the future. My grandchildren are being raised here on Cape Cod, and I want them to be able to enjoy, the beauty and natural beauty of Cape Cod and the islands, just like we have for the last, 25 years. Thank you.
So on climate change, we need to, one, address the damage that's already been done and the damage that's coming, and then two, make sure that we're not digging ourselves deeper into this hole. Really, for the Cape and Islands, that means resources, technical assistance to our municipalities, to our departments of public works, our boards of health, around preparing for what climate change means here. I actually worked on this in the Patrick administration around climate adaptability, the toolkit. This is actually something that's been continued in the Baker administration, really making sure that we are siting buildings in the context of flood plans, and making sure that we are climate resilient. We also need to continue to push and really double down on our efforts to have a clean energy economy. Yes, offshore wind, this is a really big, exciting development, far offshore, 15 miles offshore south of Martha's Vineyard. Also expansion of solar panels. I was glad to see that the solar cap was lifted. It wasn't lifted enough. I'm a proponent of having a carbon tax, of actually taxing carbon to make sure that we're shifting the market away from fossil fuels. So really there's a lot of work. This is a critical issue for us here. If all the carbon emissions stopped in the world tomorrow, we'd still be dealing with massive consequences here. So I think it's a lot of coordination between local municipalities, the county, the state, making sure the state provides resources. Just to go back to the Fair Share Amendment, I think if you're making over $1 million, you're not a small business. And I think that, if you look at the inequity that's happened, not over just the past decade, if you look at over the last 30, 40, 50 years, the wage stagnation, how we have not been asking those among us who are most privileged to pay their fair share. This is something that 140 legislators voted in favor of. This is something that's going on the ballot in 2018. This is something that 80% of voters, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, support. And I think this is part about having a correction for the trickle-down economics that, frankly, we know don't work.
This next question, there were a number of questions about the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant, so I'm going to try to combine them and just ask for your comments related to the safety regulations and costs of shutting down the plant. Specifically, one person mentioned possible revision of the Pilgrim decommission to have Cape Cod representation, possible legislation that would create a trust fund in order to deal with the costs, and also related to the safety of the citizens during the decommissioning of the power plant, specifically the disposal of spent fuel rods. We'll begin with Mr. Sear.
I worked extensively on Pilgrim issues at the Department of Public Health. Worked with Sarah Peak and Dan Wolf to write the language that's establishing a panel on decommissioning. Extensively been involved in the environmental monitoring program, the Tritium leak investigation, ensuring that 240,000 residents here on the Cape, here on the islands, have access to potassium iodide pills in the event of a disaster and emergency. We need to continue to push, and the Cape Downwinders have been doing a great job on this, pushing to hold the utility entity that owns Pilgrim to close that plant, to close the corroding plant, and to do it sooner rather than later. But this is a plant we know is going to close. And so I think what the next state senator needs to be very keen on is how do we force and push and guilt the NRC and the utility to decommission this plant swiftly and safely. What Pilgrim wants to do is to put this plant in something which is called Safe Store, which allows you to mothball the plant for up to 60 years until it's decommissioned. That is just untenable for us from a safety perspective. We need to ensure that the hundreds of spent fuel rods that are currently sitting in a pool 6 stories up are moved from that pool into dry cask storage. We need to push them to use the current workforce that is there who knows this plant. You know, imagine this plant, it's kind of like an old car, right? You've been working on it, it has its glitches and little things. Having the current workforce that's there work on actually dismembering and decommissioning this plant is also another safety feature. So this is just a really critical issue. It's a frustrating issue because the state has little jurisdiction of it. Everything that's in the fence is related to the NRC. I've worked with NEMA, with Mass Highway, with all the players here that have some role in emergency response, in the public health related issues around Pilgrim. I know this issue very well. I know all the players. I'm going to be able to continue Dan Wolf's work on this and be a very strong voice here in holding that utility accountable and pushing them towards decommissioning swiftly and safely.
Thank you. As it relates to Pilgrim, obviously the decision has been made, whether it was a business decision or not, to close the plant in 2019. Safety is my background. I spent the majority of my career as a pilot. Safety is paramount, and that includes dealing with a soon-to-be decommissioned nuclear power site. And it has to be done safely. It's an area that I have a great deal of expertise in. I've also been part of an organization that was flying airplanes and then not flying airplanes. And so when you do that, you have to look at when do you stop doing your current mission and fully focus on what you're going to be doing. And I think that's something that we need to have some oversight on as it relates to Pilgrim, because at some point people's jobs are going to be lost. They're going to be closing down the plant. They're going to need less people. Those people are worried about their futures, and they may not necessarily be focused on their job to ensure that they're running that plant safely and appropriately until it actually is shut down. And we need to have some input into that about when is the right time to stop producing power and actually start with the decommissioning process, and to do it promptly and to do it safely. As Julia mentioned, they can go into this thing called State Safe Store. It takes 5 years for these spent fuel rods to cool down before they can deal with them. So if they shut down in 2019, you're looking at around 2024 or 2025 before they start the decommissioning process. And we don't want them to go into Safe Store for 60 years, and we want to provide incentives for them to decommission sooner and make sure that they keep their fund, which is nearly $1 billion, healthy, because they have the money to properly and swiftly shut down this plant and to do it safely. There was a bill filed by Senator DiMacedo and also Senator Wolf that would provide a $25 million assessment against Pilgrim every year after this 2025 date as an incentive for them to start the decommissioning process sooner rather than later, and I would certainly support that. One thing we do need to think about, though, Pilgrim does produce power that goes into the grid, and so as we're working on safely seeing that this plant is decommissioned, and I would push to be on the committee that was established to overlook the shutdown of Pilgrim, is to make sure there's something or somebody and some type of energy to pick up the energy that's going onto the grid, so that we as a community do not suffer from not enough electrical power. And lastly, We need to work on the federal government to provide a place to bring these materials at some point in time so that we don't find that every community that has a nuclear power plant in it becomes a long-term repository for nuclear materials. We want to see that site turn back to its natural state and to be reused. Thank you.
And the next question, and I ask Mr. Schiavi to respond first, please. This is related to the economy and new businesses on the Cape. One person asked about what you might do to be able to bring full-time year-round employment to the Cape, and then another asked and mentioned specifically studying oceanography and what strategy can be developed to attract businesses to take advantage of the new technology that we to help develop Cape businesses.
Okay, so I think I may have mentioned this earlier, but one of government's roles, I think, in terms of improving the economy is helping to set the right conditions. When you look at creating jobs on the Cape, you have to give a reason for companies who want to come here and relocate. And I've been to a number of sessions at the Metro West Economic Research Center, looking at economy in Massachusetts and the things that drive positive economic growth. And one of the things that is always at the top of employers' list is quality of life. Right? We have quality of life here on Cape Cod. We have safe, secure communities. We have great schools. We obviously have the natural beauty of Cape Cod. So how do we set the right conditions to encourage companies to want to relocate to the Cape? We talked earlier about the fact that a lot of that resides on housing. And that's why I say you can't address housing without addressing jobs, and you can't address jobs without addressing housing. To recruit jobs to the Cape, we need to make sure that we help set the right conditions. So areas that they're going to relocate to have the infrastructure necessary for them to want to set up their business there, whether it's having access to water, to wastewater, to fiber optics and high-speed internet. I've worked on this. When I was the executive director of Joint Base Cape Cod, one of my roles was to look at bringing non-military economic development opportunities to the base. We applied for and we won a national competition to be one of 6 sites in Massachusetts to look at how to integrate drones into the national airspace system. There is untapped potential there for us to be able to recruit high-tech companies onto Cape Cod to test their technology, perhaps manufacture their technology, which can create jobs here on Cape Cod. Just recently, there's a company in Centerville that's looking at sense and avoid technology, which is very applicable to what I just spoke on, but also to autonomous driving and those type of things that will come in the future. They want to set up manufacturing here on Cape Cod. So how do we encourage them to do that? Our blue economy obviously surrounds a lot with fishing and recreational activities, but there's also opportunities there for high-tech companies to come in and maybe look at underwater turbines, other types of technology that need access to oceans and the ocean waters and what they provide. And that's a way to bring jobs to Cape Cod, and I would work on all of those to make sure that we help set the right conditions for economic growth and development on the Cape. But it does include housing, it does include making sure we have the right infrastructure.
Thank you.
I like to talk about how do we ensure good jobs that pay the bills here on the Cape in 3 buckets. We definitely have to pay attention to the bread and butter of our economy, our seasonal tourist economy, hospitality. This is really based on efforts to extend the season. I think funding for arts and culture, support from the state is really critical there. It makes a big difference. In my family, it was always a conversation. How late do we keep the restaurant open? Do we stay open to Columbus Day? Do we go to Halloween? Do we close sooner? Can we take the hit on payroll? Those are conversations that a lot of small business owners are having here on the Cape. Extending that season is critical. The second bucket is around innovation and healthcare. I think a lot of efforts in expansion of Open Cape. How do we prepare the Cape to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our community in future years? We talked about this earlier. The expansion, particularly around community health centers, is I think a piece where folks can find good paying jobs. Ensuring that home health workers are paid a living wage and an adequate wage, I think is also really critical. And then the third bucket is around, we talk a lot about our blue economy here, and I'm most interested in how do we make sure that we're talking about our blue economy that's a blue collar economy, right? When we think about the blue economy here on the Cape, this is actually something that's not new. I mean, we were a blue economy under salt making and whaling and fishing. Aquaculture has become something that really is a tremendous opportunity for folks. I think I look back to how the generation before mine used to make a life on the Cape, where you could build a life, start a family, have a business, just with grit and hard work. You didn't need a fancy degree. I think we need to make sure that we're paying attention to those opportunities as well. I think there's a lot of focus on white collar work and innovation and good paying jobs. We need to also make sure that everyone in our community can have a living wage and can afford to live here. Tony is absolutely right. We really agree on this around housing, and I think housing is a really critical issue as well.
The next question will begin with Mr. Sear, and I'm combining several questions related to mental health. That here in Massachusetts, we're known for, the important way that we handle mental health issues. However, compared to the rest of the United States, however, a member of the audience is still talking about how this is broken. Do you have any specific suggestions of what you might be able to do with mental health programs and support, especially for those individuals who, once they turn 18, many of the mental health programs drop off? And what would you work to do to address this problem?
This is an excellent question. It's something that I think state government has really struggled in. How do you transition people from the juvenile-based care to adult care? Specifically, I think we need to find a way in this state to fund psychiatric beds in our hospitals that are not tied to specifically to reimbursements. Cape Cod Healthcare and many other healthcare providers across the state and hospitals across the state have backed off from those psych units because they're so costly, because the reimbursement is relatively so low. This makes a really big difference. I've been talking to some of the community health workers who've been making a lot of progress on the mental health and substance abuse and homelessness issues in downtown Hyannis, the lieutenant in the police department who's worked on that. And their big concern is that you have someone who clearly is in a crisis. You may be able to bring them to the emergency room, and there's nowhere for this person to go, beyond sort of being stabilized for a day or two. You talk to any parent who has a child who's been struggling with mental health on the Cape. I have dear friends and family friends who've done this, and supporters of mine who are in this predicament, and it's really frustrating. Broadly, we moved away from, in the past few decades, institutions, which I think was a good move, but community-based mental health is not cutting it. So I think we need to specifically find ways to make sure that, one, people can get the care they need, and two, there are step-down services and a continuum of care. As a public health person, I just know that if we don't get that right, we're going to increasingly have people who end up, homeless again and suffering in their mental illness and substance abuse, and it's really a vicious cycle. A lot of this has been about cost savings. A lot of this has been about cutting corners and saving money in the state. And so I think, again, it comes back to a revenue conversation. And I think, without no new tax, the sort of no new taxes, no new fees mantra, again, is really disingenuous if you want to help people who are struggling, our most vulnerable who are struggling, especially our children and our young adults.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think there's a number of steps we can take to address this issue. I think we all know that it's an issue that needs addressing. Mental health issues often manifest themselves later on in substance abuse disorder, and how do you separate the two if you're dealing with someone that has mental health issues. As a police commissioner, we knew that many times those that are suffering from mental health issues, sometimes their first exposure is to a police officer. And we made sure that our officers were trained not only to recognize the signs, but we brought on a mental health clinician to be embedded in our police department so that when officers came upon somebody and they suspected they may have mental health issues, how can we then sort of divert them away from the legal system and the law enforcement system and into a more appropriate care system. And I think that's one aspect. It's not really appropriate really to deal with them through the law enforcement system. And I know that the district attorney has established some of those programs, and I support those, and I think they need to be expanded, because many times our police departments are becoming more and more dealing with social issues along with the normal things that they deal with. The closure of the state hospitals years ago and where they stand today, institutionalization is not the right answer. So how do we sort of bring maybe some of that back, but do it in a way that provides dignity to those that are suffering from mental health issues and getting them the right care. I think it's going to be a public-private kind of thing. I don't think the government can fully take that over. We certainly have a role in that, but I think it needs to be sort of a public-private venture in that regard. And again, when we deal with homelessness, and I co-authored a proposal for Barnstable dealing with the homeless situation sort of centered around permanent supportive housing, which has been nationally recognized by the National Alliance to End Homelessness as a way to deal with those that are chronically homeless, because many times those individuals have mental health issues, substance abuse issues. You put that permanent housing around them and then wrap the services that they need to get better, to get back on their feet, to deal with their substance abuse disorders and their mental health issues, and try to get them, if they can, get them on a track and back into society where we can all be around them. So thank you.
And this will be the final question. It's related to human trafficking, which is the second most prevalent criminal enterprise in the United States, second only to the sale of drugs. What is your awareness of the problem on Cape Cod, and what are your ideas for raising awareness and prevention? This would begin with Mr. Schiavi.
Sure. Human trafficking is everywhere. A lot of times when we look at issues around the nation or around the Commonwealth, sometimes we maybe think of ourselves as being a little insulated from that type of thing, but it really is everywhere. There's been some reports in the paper probably within the last year. A lot of these human trafficking type situations revolve around prostitution and other illegal activities. And we have to be able to deal with those, and people need to recognize what the signs are of human trafficking. And in the military, we dealt with this a lot with our service members that are overseas, and we receive specific training about how you can see the signs or potential signs of human trafficking. And it exists here on Cape Cod like it does anywhere else. And certainly our law enforcement professionals here on the Cape need to be aware of human trafficking and how do we put a stop to it. It's a difficult problem. Part of it results from most of these people being undocumented. We don't really know who they are, and it's a very difficult problem to spot. It's a very difficult problem to then react to and try to find solutions for. And I think we need to continue to work on that and make sure that human trafficking is really stamped out, not just on Cape Cod, but in Massachusetts and across our nation, because it really is a major issue, and much of it surrounds immigrants that have come into this country many times on the promise of jobs or citizenship or whatever, and they're taken advantage by somebody that wants to use them in ways that are just not humane and should never happen. And I'm obviously a proponent of figuring out ways that we can do a better job of spotting human trafficking, arrest those that are accountable, are responsible for that, and hold them accountable and take these people out of these very horrible type situations.
Yeah, I'm really glad someone asked this question. I think this is the first time we've got this question on, and human trafficking and related issues is something that is happening on Cape Cod. It is happening on the islands. It's just something we don't talk about. There's a terrific group here on the Cape that's actually working on these issues. I was fortunate they were able to bring an installation to downtown Hyannis this summer. I was fortunate to speak there with Sheriff Cummings and a number of other folks. I think for our work here on the Cape, in addition to supporting police work, working with federal partners, it's really about having an honest conversation about what's truly happening in our communities, who truly is living in our communities, and being really honest about seeing ourselves for who we are. There's been a lot of conversation around homelessness, around the opiate epidemic and others, and it's been a process and something I've watched, and I myself have worked to really see that folks struggling with addiction live in and of our community, that immigrants who come here are being exploited in our community, that human trafficking does exist, that homelessness, the folks that are homeless and struggling on the streets in our communities aren't just people who've been imported here, but are in and of our community. And I think that a lot of the, in this case, I think this is a job for the state senator to really bring conversation and bring awareness to issues of exploitation, of racial justice, and really push our communities to ask who's participating. When I look at who sits on the various boards in our towns and our communities, who's representing, who's making big decisions, they tend to look like folks who look like Tony and me, and are not reflective of, I think, the racial and ethnic diversity of where the Cape is going. I think a Brazilian community here in the Mid-Cape that is very vibrant, but very much doesn't have a seat at the table. This is something that I really want to listen and learn and try to do my part as state senator to really be a little more honest on the Cape about who we are, who is here, and a broader conception of ourselves and our community.
Thank you, and we would
Point
now
of
have our...
order, time extension.
Look,
We came here.
excuse me, we have time for closing statements now. We'll begin with Mr.
Some of us
Schiavi.
have questions. My question is to Julian Sir. The question is,
Mr. Schiavi,
in
could you begin
August,
with the opening
you
statement, please?
basically...
I mean, closing statement.
No, I'm not sitting yet, sorry. You basically
All right.
outed out Representative Manal.
Thank you for your participation. I have asked all but one question. It was only one question that we didn't have
You outed
time
out Representative Manal.
for. That was not a question that we
You
had.
had a progressive agenda, and you have $232,000 in your campaign chest. This is a joke. We're fed pattern here. It's a freaking joke.
Mr. Schiavi, could you begin
I
with
just
your
wanna wait till
closing?
we have
Okay.
Have a wonderful day. Jesus Christ.
First of all, thank you all for coming today and listening to Julie and I. Today you've heard from the two candidates running for the Cape Cod State Senate. And I think you can see there's a contrast in how we look at things and how we look at solving issues facing the Cape and Islands. You know, the region's problems must be solved with effective, proven leadership. My opponent has said several times before that it's not about the length of the resume, and he's right, but it's about the quality of the resume. And mine clearly shows a depth and breadth of experience that is needed to address the wide-ranging issues affecting the Cape and Islands. And holding the title of state senator certainly isn't a birthright either. I respect my opponent in everything that he's done, his energy, his enthusiasm, his potential, in spite of our sharp differences in views. But today's today, and it's not the future. And I believe we need more balance on Beacon Hill and a leadership from the middle, and not necessarily from this extreme of any party. And I believe that this view is the majority in the region. We need effective leadership today on Beacon Hill that stretches across party lines when necessary, that results in independent thinking, thoughtful decisions, and legislations that work for the benefit of all. Our founding fathers were independent thinkers who didn't march blindly to any political party line. They were experienced, they were cerebral, and thought outside the box for the greater good. Such forward-thinking leadership is sorely needed on Beacon Hill, frontline, proven experience, and thinking outside of the box. In my military career as a town manager and as a police commissioner, I've had to bridge the boundaries of partisan politics many times and did so very successfully for the greater good of those that I served. And I've been proud to do so, and I'm committed to that ideal. We don't need business as usual on Beacon Hill either. We need independent, pragmatic problem solvers dedicated to the views of all, and I pledge to serve in that way just as I have served our country. We need a state senator that can be a unifying force for Cape Cod and the Islands delegation, all working together, and I believe that I can be that unifying force. I'm the only candidate in this race that has been endorsed by 100% of the elected officials in our delegation. We are not separate. We need to be one, and we need to unify for the Cape Cod and the Islands. And I would be honored if you would allow me the honor of putting my experience and my resume to work for all of you, and I respectfully ask for your vote on November 8th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, especially Nancy, to moderating, notwithstanding your premature coronation. But so I'm running for state senate because I believe Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket should be a place, should remain a place where young couples can build a life, start a business, raise a family, just like my parents' generation did. However, as so many of us know, these opportunities are slipping away. The opportunities that so many of us were able to tap into, that's changing. We need affordable housing, and we need good jobs that pay the bills. I believe that those fighting addiction should get the treatment they deserve, that our seniors get the services they need when they retire, and that our unique coastal environment remain an international destination. I really hear actually a lot of agreement, not only just between Tony and I, but agreement when I'm talking to folks in our community. We've knocked on over, I think, 18,000 doors in this campaign. I've knocked on over 2,000 personally. And really, I hear everyone talking about the same issues. And so increasingly, I think that running for state senate isn't just about the longest resume or who has the most executive experience, but really who has the relevant experience who can move, I think, a consensus of issues around how do we advance housing affordability? How do we truly solve the opioid epidemic? I've seen how our communities have changed. I know the challenges that we faced, and Cape Cod is in my DNA, and that lived experience is in my DNA. We have weathered challenges before, and we will again, at least until we go into the sea. We need the right leadership to move us forward. And isn't it time to send a native son to Beacon Hill, someone who can hit the ground running and make sure that we are not left behind? When the legislature convenes, would you rather have someone who's chaired a state commission, a senator whose legislative experience includes 6 budgets, and passing legislation with members of our delegation, like Sarah Peak, like Dan Wolf, a senator who has a background in public health, who can tackle the opiate epidemic, a senator whose first year will include chairing a committee and sitting on 6 other committees, being in leadership, and a senator who has the endorsement of 20 other diverse organizations, the majority of municipal and county officials in Barnstable County. Thank you so much for your time. We're both working really hard to earn your vote, and I respectfully ask for your vote on Tuesday, November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could, I do have 3 brief announcements. Voters will be holding a forum on October 21st, a debate for the candidates running for the Barnstable County Commissioner. That's at 10 o'clock at the Cape Cod Community Media Center at 17 Shady Hill Road in Dennisport.